Hello, everybody, and welcome to Avid Reader Bookshop. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. In this area, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and I'd like to pay my deepest respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to any other Aboriginal Indigenous people who are here tonight. And because we are zooming out generally to lots of places across Australia, we are zooming out onto the lands of many different Aboriginal people, and I'd like to pay my deepest respects to elders of the land that you are zooming in from. This always was, and this always will be Aboriginal land. Sovereignty was never ceded. So tonight, it's my great pleasure to host this event, particularly as the election has just been called. And I think that the ABC should be front and centre of our minds at all times, but particularly at this time when it has become a bit of a political football. So I, for one, am very, very happy that we're hosting this event tonight. To make the event more smooth for everybody, could we turn your phones to silent? We do encourage social media, tweeting, you know, any kind of chatter online about the event. We are at Avid Reader 4101, and if I have any battery on my phone left, I will be tweeting something, maybe just one tweet before it goes dead. So please feel free to join me. Also, a couple of bits of housekeeping. The book is front and centre at the counter tonight. So after the event, we're going to go to a signing, which will be held at the very front of the shop. And feel free to grab the book from the counter and to join us at the front of the shop for a signing after the event. For those of you who are joining us for Zoom, I know Eleanor has just put a little link in the chat function, so you can purchase that through the link, or you can call the shop on 07 3846 3422, pay for it over the phone, and then you can get it personally autographed. So if you do that during the event tonight, the staff at the front counter will be able to put that aside and get it personally autographed at the end of the event. For those of you in the real room, we do have an easy to get to toilet, which is a cubicle just in the corner out there. So careful of the darkness, but once you do step out there, there's a little step, but in the corner, you'll see a light, and that's where the easiest toilet to get to is tonight. So if you need the facilities, that's where they are. And I think, one more bit of housekeeping, which is when we go to questions at the end, people who are joining us via Zoom can use that chat function to ask a question. I know there will be plenty of questions from the audience, so we may not get time for all of them, but please put your question through as soon as you think of it, and you'll be top of the list. So tonight, it is my great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Carolyn Graham, who is an award-winning investigative journalist and a lecturer in digital journalism at the University of Queensland. She specialises in narrative non-fiction storytelling across both traditional and new media forms, including podcasting, data-driven reporting, and long-form creative non-fiction. Carolyn is the co-author of the Australian bestseller Larimar, which was shortlisted for an Indies Book Award and has been optioned by NBC, Universal, and Matchbox Pictures for potential development into a scripted series. Carolyn's co-produced 2 crime podcast series, Lost in Larimar, won a Walkley Award and was a finalist in the Australian Podcasting Awards. In addition to writing feature stories and creative non-fiction for a range of publications, Carolyn co-authored with Matthew Ricketson, Writing Feature Stories, How to Research and Write Articles from Listicles to Long Form. So look her up and grab that book if you are doing your own writing. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in that too. Everybody, please welcome Dr. Carolyn Graham.
Thank you all for being here. Have you all here. You mentioned that be careful of the darkness on the way into the bathrooms there, and that is not the only darkness we're going to be talking about, because we are starting to imagine what a world without the ABC might look like. So I'd like to introduce the authors tonight. Matthew Ricketson, I'm a bit embarrassed because instead of reading their full bios, I asked them at the pub over a beer for a bio. So Matthew told me that he was an academic and journo of 4 decades and then devolved into a sort of existential crisis about his age. But he's a very well accomplished, both a journalist and a lecturer who's done a lot to inspire the next generation of reporters. He's a prolific writer. He currently heads up the journalism degree at Deakin University. And his latest book before this is Upheaval, Disrupted Lives in Journalism. And Patrick Mullins was even more humble. When asked to describe himself, he just said a writer, which is really underselling it. So he has won both the New South Wales Premier Award and the National Bio Award for his book Tiberius with a Telephone. And that's not your only book either. You've also written The Trials of Courtenay, How Penguin Brought Down Australia's Censorship System. So hugely accomplished writers, journos, thinkers, thank you for being here tonight. This is such an urgent and kind of impassioned book about the ABC. I thought we might start. Could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the ABC, professionally, but also personally?
Okay, I'll kick that one off. Professionally, I've never worked at the ABC. I have been interviewed on the ABC on many occasions, like many people from all sorts of different walks of life. So I've been a lifelong viewer and listener of the ABC. I love it as an organisation. I hate it as an organisation. When I start yelling at the television or I start yelling at the screen, I think I'm like a lot of people in that sense, with both a lot of passion for the organisation and for what it does, and also some frustration. I guess that frustration, if you like, was actually not the primary impetus in writing the book. I think I mean, Patrick came into it, I brought Patrick into it, but what really struck me and what was really getting up my nose was how I was getting completely sick of the ABC being bashed up year after year after year by governments, in particular by the coalition government, the one that we've had in power since 2013, and by other sections of the media. And, you know, the media is a rough and combative kind of environment. Everybody kind of knows that. But the way in which the ABC has been targeted and the hostility directed towards it has gone well beyond the kind of standard argy-bargy that goes on in the media, which most people don't really notice and don't care about, nor should they. But, you know, it's primarily from News Corp Australia, not only, but primarily, and it's almost unremitting in its hostility. If you only read those publications or if you only listened to the federal government, you would think that the ABC was not only the worst media organisation in this country, but they probably should be deported to, you know, a convict island many some places away. So that seemed to me to be a bit of a problem.
Right. Patrick, what place does the ABC have in your life?
So similar to Matthew, the ABC has kind of been a background that's come up in my life. As a child, obviously grew up watching a lot of the ABC. I have very, very fond memories of stealing my older brother's copy of the 1997 Triple J Hottest 100 compilation album. He's never getting it back. But even more so, like as Matthew was saying, one of the things that's become incredibly apparent over the last couple of years has been not only the ABC's pervasive role and presence in Australia, and we've talked recently about the ABC's new news site being the actually most visited news site in the country, but kind of contending at the same time with these constant attacks, this constant criticism, this constant barrage. And so for my part of this, when Matthew invited me to come work with him on this project, I thought this is a fight actually probably worth joining, because this is something that is under attack, and once we lose it, it's not coming back. Full stop.
I mean, it is a fight. You spend quite a solid portion of the book kind of investigating the threats against the ABC, and there are threats kind of from every angle. Before we get to those threats, I think often when we're talking about sort of media, the threat is online and digital, and that landscape. But the ABC has thrived in this. Can you tell us a little bit about ABC's digital work? And
Sure. Well, you're right. I mean, the rest of the news media in this country and in other countries around the world, it's had a business model problem as the internet has arrived, and then as the various online free sites have kind of cannibalized the classified and display advertising, which used to be the primary form of revenue for the big newspaper companies and indeed the television stations. And now much of that has gone to Google and Facebook. And so they've had a business model problem. They've been trying for at least a decade to grapple with it. One of the ways they grappled with that was to just offload lots and lots and lots of journalists, which was what the previous book was about, upheaval. The ABC does not have a business model problem. The ABC, because they can happily give away their material for free. They're kind of required to give away their material for free by dint of the act that governs them. And so no revenue is running out the door for them in that context, which means both as commercial media has had problems, they haven't had problems, they've expanded. Their problem has really come from a government which has cut their money, cut their funding, and has done over since this government came to power in September 2013. And that's been a problem. Probably an equally large proportion of journalists have needed to leave because of the cuts, as happened in the News Corporation and in Fairfax, which now is the Nine Entertainment Company, and so on. It's just different reasons why it's happened, but it's had a devastating effect in both areas of the media. So that's kind of part of the backdrop that we wanted to sketch, because it's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it is one of the reasons why the commercial media or sections of it are so hostile, because they've got some genuine problems in their own life, and the ABC is kind of an easy target to take out their angst on, whereas really the people that really taking the money are Google and Facebook.
You've mentioned politics. We can't really have this conversation without making it political. You spend quite a lot of time investigating kind of the origins of government hostility towards the ABC. What's at the heart of that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of attitudes and problems at play. One is at a kind of the governmental level. The right side of politics is fundamentally opposed to government outlay revenue going to fund public programs. So a public broadcaster just doesn't fit with that. The market can do it, the market should do it. Yeah, that's what it is. The other part of it, though, and I think probably the more important part, is one of self-interest. The ABC is an organisation over which the government, beyond its revenue and beyond its ability to bring people to Senate estimates, committee hearings, and berate them, has really no power in the ABC. And so journalists asking questions, doing investigative journalism, putting politicians on the spot and interrogating them about why they've done certain things, makes politicians uncomfortable. Obviously, that goes to the territory for being a politician. But in particular, for people on the right side of politics, have come to regard the ABC as being fundamentally hostile to them. One critic likes to call the ABC a collectivist, a bunch of lefties, likes to suggest that they're all socialists, they're all Greens, etc., etc. And so they see the ABC as kind of being an avowed opponent of conservative politics. And one of the quotes we got from a Conservative MP, Darren Chester and Pete Ricketson, is that colleagues within his party regard the ABC as the enemy. So it's called the enemy. That's why it's not helpful.
I mean, this is an argument that's often sort of invoked in attack of the ABC, is that it is biased, that it is left-leaning. Did you find any evidence for that?
Well, there's a couple of left-leaning lattes and city-dwelling self-abusers. Of course we didn't. No, seriously. Look, as I said at the beginning, anyone and everyone can have frustrations with individual programs or interviews or particular news stories and so on. And there's no doubt that the ABC, like any media organisation, makes mistakes, gets things wrong, the kind of tone, the intent's not quite right. So that said, we did look quite hard for a rigorous academic study which would reveal systemic bias at the ABC, and we could not find it. If it's out there, then very happy to have a look at it, but we couldn't find it. You can certainly find, questions and criticisms of individual programs, but the notion which many of its critics charge the ABC with, that is, it's a left-leaning, etc., all those things, is not sustained by the evidence. And in fact, the ABC assesses and scrutinises itself in a way that no other media organisation in the country does. They do every election that happens, it'll be happening right now, they look at exactly how much time and either on radio or television or online, how much space is devoted to each leader and to each party. And, we've looked at the reports that come out after each election, and they don't show any major difference between the airtime that the major parties get. In fact, the first time this was done in 2007, in response to complaints from the Howard coalition government and near its end, it actually showed quite a substantial weighting towards coalition in terms of airtimes, but the various critics of the ABC, I've never actually seen mention that. So, but also, more importantly in a way, how you assess the way in which media covers things is actually much more complicated than simply toting up the amount of time that the Prime Minister has versus the amount of time that the opposition leader has, because some people are very, very powerful and eloquent in a few sentences, and some people, it doesn't matter how long you let them speak for, they'll bumble around. So how do you assess that? How do you assess if someone refuses to come onto your program? How do you assess tone and nuance, raised eyebrows, and all those kinds of things? It isn't easy, but that said, whatever academic studies we've looked at have not shown any kind of systemic bias. In fact, what they show is that the ABC is fairer than most other news organisations and fair to the point sometimes of becoming bland.
You talked there a little bit about some of those standards within the newsroom and the standards for objectivity or fairness. There's a part that I really love in here where you talk about, I guess because the ABC is a public commodity, we all have this vested interest in, we're funding it, it belongs to us sort of culturally, of kind of maybe setting those high standards, at least as far as news goes. But you also say that we don't have that standard for sort of public funded comedy. It has to be funnier than corporate comedy. And we certainly don't for our health system. Our public health system does not have to have a higher standard than our private system. What do you think the public expects of the ABC?
It's all about your Ricketson.
Okay, well, I think, all right. There is both a good reason and a bad reason for the fact that the ABC is held to a higher standard than the rest of the news media. I mean, the good reason is that there is an act that governs the ABC's activities, and it requires the ABC to be comprehensive in its news and current affairs, to be thorough, to be honest, accurate, and so on. So, there's a piece of legislation saying that. So, yes, that's a very good reason that you should adhere to your piece of legislation. The bad reason is that this same legislation is used by critics of the ABC, well, not only critics, but those with a vested interest, to attack the ABC. All right, and that you can see that in the government, not only the coalition government. Clearly, if we want to talk historically, there have been instances of Labor prime ministers and others being very upset with the ABC, but the weight historically is with coalition governments, but also other parts of the media. And they use all sorts of processes that the ABC has, whether it's its internal complaints system, which is extensive, which then can, if you're not happy with it, you can appeal to the Australian Communications and Media Authority. If you're not happy with a result, you can go to Senate estimates, you can get freedom of information requests can be sent into the ABC and them demanded, or they are being demanded of information there. So it gets used and it gets gained. And if you look, which we did, if you look at the programs and presenters who are most complained about on the ABC to ACMA, and you compare that to the programs and presenters from commercial radio and television who are most complained about, there's a stark difference. And what it shows basically is that over a period of about 10 years, from about 2010 to 2020, more complaints about commercial radio and television than about the ABC, more complaints upheld about commercial radio and television than the ABC. So the idea that there is appalling things happening at the ABC is not borne out by the independent government-funded regulator of broadcast media, and as a kind of coder, if you like, or a bit of a spritzer, the penalties that are applied to the people in commercial media, in brackets, Alan Jones, in brackets, range from, a slap on the wrist with a, 5-day-old piece of lettuce to not much more. And so, Alan Jones has been complained about more often than any other shock jock, as far as we could tell, and yet you wouldn't know it. I think Alan Jones has been held to account on a couple of occasions through defamation actions, private defamation actions brought by people about things that he's broadcast, but ACMA, as a regulator, has barely held him to account. So that contrast between, I'm just using Alan Jones as an example, he's the most obvious example. It's not the only one, Kyle and Jackie O, et cetera, But that compared to the ABC, there is quite a stark contrast. And I could be wrong, but it's very, very rarely written about or commented on this kind of difference in the way the various regulatory systems treat the different parts of the media.
I assume maybe that most of the people here are here because they're fond of the ABC. I mean, we've talked a bit about the news and how important having that sort of public broadcast news structure is. But I'm also interested in sort of the cultural elements of the ABC too, particularly maybe in regional and rural areas. I've just done a big outback trip, and every pub I was in, whether it was landline or call the midwife, like we were just constantly having to ask people to turn down the ABC so we could do an interview. What is the role, Patrick, of ABC in culture in Australia?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that goes to one of the reasons why the ABC is so important. I'll just do two strands. Right? First of all, the ABC is a cultural player in Australia. I think the argument can be very easily made that the ABC is the biggest, most pervasive, and probably most valuable cultural organisation in this country. The ABC is now 90 years old, and over that time, it's built up an enormous record of building audiences, of reflecting Australians reflecting Australia back to Australians, as well as encouraging and developing new generations of talent across radio, music, television, and so on. And my wife will have me mentioning this, but the cricket is a really good example of this. Sorry to anyone who hates the cricket. But the ABC is actually one of the prime movers in developing a national audience for cricket in this country. It was through the ABC's national reach that cricket built a national audience. And in the 1970s, obviously, Kerry Packer came in and took it over and monetised it. And so you got, Boffins doing the commentary after.
Stump the can.
Stump the can, yes. But that's the kind of one example, one very small example of the enormous cultural impact that the ABC has had in Australia. Another really good example, I think, is the ABC's work for children. Now, most of us will think of probably play school, and maybe we've bananas in pajamas, thank you very much. Right? Bluey.
I love this audience, Bob. Shout out your favourite ABC program. We'll take a stroll
around the
trees.
One of the things that COVID revealed, though, is that the ABC is really quite proactive in addressing and meeting the needs of children, and this is going to be broadcast. Commercial media networks just put up their regular TV shows. Fine. ABC went a lot further. They broadcast news series because TV presenters presenting from their own homes, talking about what it was going to be like being in isolation and studying at home. You know, they did all this kind of stuff that commercial networks just didn't do. And in doing so, the ABC continues to build this audience that comes up and which takes on new programs, which, you know, watches new things. And you can chart that. You know, you have the Triple J Hottest 100 for a reason. It'll push you across eventually to 2J, and then maybe on the classic. The thing about this, and you know, this is one of the things I think it's worth saying. Neither Matthew nor I are wholly starstruck by the ABC. We do think it has flaws. And one of the biggest, I think, is that it is not doing enough to appeal to people who are around my age. So if you're in that 18 to 35 bracket, the ABC has a little bit more. We come to regional and rural Australia. A couple of years ago, we've had fires and floods in this country. And I think a lot of people have woken up to the fact that the ABC is pervasive and performs an incredibly important role. When you needed information about fires, you turn on the ABC, whether that was the radio or the TV. And for a lot of people, this kind of idea came about that the ABC is the national emergency broadcaster. Now, it's not. It's not that at all, and it doesn't have the funds to do it. But it takes on and does that because it sees this as an important role. The ABC has long regarded itself and seen itself as having an ability to build a nation through its broadcasts. And that being something that goes from its ability to broadcast in Sydney, to Dubbo, to Alice Springs, to Fremantle. Like across the country, you can reflect it back to one another and bring the country together. In rural and regional Australia, it's incredibly important. I think one other slight comment to make here too. We talked a little bit before about bias. One academic study we did find about bias was about Macca, a prolific. It found that he's actually quite conservative and that there is a right-wing bias to much of the content he broadcasts. So, I mean, I haven't seen that surface in dry on the Slack blog. I'd like to see it.
I mean, I'm just noticing the audience reactions when you're kind of reading out these programs. We can all hear the bird sounds of Macca. You know, I think there is so much affection for the ABC. How concerned is the general public about the potential loss of the ABC?
Well, we should ask everyone here. I'm sure they'll tell us during question time. I think that was one of the reasons we wrote the book. And I mean, we explicitly say early on, we do not claim to speak either for the ABC or to speak on behalf of, you know, 25 million Australians. But what we do want to do is start a conversation, start a debate about the ABC, which is you know, funded by all of us through our taxes. Because what we're worried about is that if, you know, why the subtitle, why taking it for granted is no longer an option is because in the face of these concerted attacks from government and from other sections of the media, if they're the only voices being heard, then, you know, a government could be forgiven for thinking, oh, okay, if nobody cares too much about it, well, okay, we will continue with our death by 1,000 cuts to the ABC or worse, a kind of a beheading at some point. So we really want to start and encourage that conversation and debate. And everybody has different views about the ABC, programs they love, programs they hate, things that, you know, that drive them crazy, things that they just have helped them get through the pandemic. You know, the wonderful thing that broadcasters have when they are in your ear as you're walking around your house and you're making dinner or whatever it might be. That oral medium is so powerful, and we do feel like we have this connection to a lot of broadcasters, not just the ABC, obviously commercial broadcasters as well, but that kind of intense relationship that we have with broadcasting with the ABC. What we would really like to do is encourage it for people to speak out about it and to, you know, whether it's to contact your local MP, whether it's to contact the media, whether it's to start petitioning, letter writing campaigns, and so on, but so that the people who are in charge of these kinds of funding decisions know that there is opposition, just like they know that the way in which older people are being treated in aged care facilities is completely unacceptable. And not only is there a Royal Commission telling us that, but people are, going to various places and saying, this is unacceptable for the way in which my mother or my father or my brother or sister is being treated. And, they can be in no uncertainty about how people feel about that now. And that's absolutely as it should be. And we're sort of asking people to start to engage in the same way publicly about their ABC.
I think one corollary to add that is the current fight going on over in the UK. Those who read the BBC, the London papers, will know that the Conservative government, led by Boris Johnson, recently announced that it was going to end the licensing fee, which funds the BBC. It also announced plans to privatise Channel 4, which is another public broadcaster over there. So I hope neither Matthew and I have kind of appeared as hysterical, but this is something that is a live possibility. A couple of years ago, Richard Alston declared that there was no one in the Parliament who favours privatising the ABC. Newsflash, there are. We're in Queensland tonight. LNP Senator James McGrath declared on 3 occasions in the Senate that he would like to cut up the ABC. He's one of your coalition representatives in the state. So it's not a dead option, it is live, it's on the table.
And what would that look like?
So this is great, it's giving me an occasion to bash. One of the kind of delightful things that we got to do in this book was to look at the case for privatisation of the ABC, in particular to scrutinise the most sustained case made for privatisation of the ABC by 2 guys, Chris Evans and Davis. To call this book substantive would be to give it predecessors that it deserves, because it is worthless, it's useless. The ideas floated for privatisation of that book and what it would look like are absolutely ill-formed, vague, would be charitable. They have ideas about flogging the equipment, they have ideas about having staff take shares in the company, and they've got nothing. What we know, though, is that if they did privatise the ABC, apparently, according to the critics of the ABC, the government would get a $1 billion swing in the budget. $1 billion extra per year to play with. $1 billion per year extra in a budget of $677 billion. It's not going to make a whole lot of difference. That $1 billion there.
And I should say we're going to save some time for audience questions as well. So start collecting those. I've obviously got plenty of questions here, but we'll throw to the audience shortly if you've got questions that you're saving up. I guess there's a few phases as we're kind of talking about privatisation, death by 1,000 cuts that are getting, that are starting to look alarmed. What can we and should we be doing, either individually, collectively, if we do feel unsettled by that concept?
Well, I would start by contacting your local MP and letting them know what your views are about the ABC. Ring into your local ABC station and talk about this issue. I mean, it's, they'll have talk back on anything and everything every day of the week. And I don't think we're being alarmist. I mean, the federal Liberal Party's federal council voted by a 2/3 majority about 4 years ago to abolish or privatise the ABC. And the kind of defences that were made at that time by various government ministers, including the current Prime Minister, were pretty, flaccid, really. They said, oh, it's not going to happen. But they didn't say, this is the craziest idea we've ever heard. I mean, this is a national institution that is celebrating or commemorating its 90th anniversary this year. It's one of the oldest public broadcasters in the world. The BBC, which is having its centenary this year, is as far as we can work out, the oldest and the largest. So the ABC is right up there. So those are some things that could be done. I want to just, if I may, draw attention to something which, if I don't, our critics will, which is we worked with another researcher, Michael Ward, who used to work at the ABC and now is doing a PhD at the University of Sydney about the ABC. And what we were interested in was to have a proper forensic look at the way in which various governments have funded the ABC. And we went back to 1983 when the ABC as a commission became a corporation. And at that stage, Bob Hawke became Prime Minister. And it just so happens that kind of nearly 40-year period cleaves almost 50-50 coalition governments and Labor governments. You know, Hawke and Keating, followed by Howard, followed by Rudd, followed by Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison. If you look at the funding for the ABC in those four sets of governments, Labor, Liberal coalition, Labor coalition again, the graph, which I'm happy to tell you is on page 186 of the book, literally looks like a cross-cut saw. Okay, it goes up under Hawke Keating, down under Howard, up under Rudd, down under Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison. Like, it's quite stark. Actually, delete the word quite, it is stark. And so people will, the weird thing that happens here is that people will say, governments will say, oh, well, you know, no one wants to talk about this because the coalition government might like to bash up the ABC, but they also like to run fiction that they treat it like anyone else. And the Labor opposition, and indeed when they're in government, don't tend to want to say, we fund the ABC and SBS for that matter better than the other guys. They tend to sort of just slide under the radar a little bit in that sense. The ABC doesn't like to talk about this either. They don't want to point out the cross-cut saw. And the commercial media, either at News Corp Australia, they're not interested in pointing it out. And the rest of the media is either relatively uninterested or very uninterested. So I can tell you, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I'm almost certain I'm right. This information has not been out there in this form. Okay? That there is such a stark difference in the way in which governments of different political persuasions fund the ABC, and yet, you know, it's something we need to kind of talk about, think about, and ask questions about. Does it mean, you know, is it a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I've got views on that, but I do think we're at the very least, we need the information, you know, carefully researched and calculated information from Michael Ward that allows us to start having that particular part of the discussion.
All right, this might be a good time. I've got a few more questions as well, but this might be a good time to throw to the audience. Is there anyone here who's got a question they'd like to ask? It's the gentleman there.
Following on from what you're talking about, why do you think the Labor Party is reluctant to draw attention to that?
And I'll just repeat that for the people online. So just following on from what you're talking about, why is the Labor Party reluctant?
I don't know. I think you have to ask them. I mean, Patrick mentioned earlier the dedicated children's channel, and everybody suddenly started, you know, twittering around the room about various programs. That was brought in under the Gillard government, Rudd Gillard government, a dedicated 24-hour day, or sorry, if not 24-hour, but a dedicated children's television channel where all of that programming goes. There are some people in Labor who will point to their record and stand happily behind it, but I haven't seen the current opposition leader doing that. If you noticed earlier this year, the government, you know, in what appeared to be an attempt to kind of cauterise the ABC as an election issue, said they were going to restore the ABC's indexation funding, which they had been cutting, and they were going to give them just the barest amount more each year in the budget in the forward estimates. So the line of rhetoric was, you know, yes, we think the ABC is terrific, we're looking after it. If you drill down into the figures, which Michael has done, we're going to write, Patrick and Michael are going to write something about that. It's about the least amount that you could add to say that you've added a little bit more. And in fact, excuse me, sorry, when you look at it in real terms, as distinct from nominal terms, the ABC is still going backwards in a couple of years' time. Labor has done about the same. And, they've said they would, you know, reintroduce the indexing, put it back. They've also said, and this is the one positive thing they have said in this context, that they agree with the idea that the funding of the ABC should not be done in 3-year blocks, but should be done in 5-year blocks. The idea being that that takes it out of the electoral cycle, and almost all observers and commentators think that's a potentially helpful thing. So they've done that. But beyond that, unless I missed it, I haven't seen anything from Labor so far saying, you know, we think this, this, and this about the ABC. We want to do this and we want to do that. And there's SBS and so on and so on.
So, sir, do you have a view about the reason why?
No, I don't. I was just curious when you put it in that.
Do we have another question there?
Thanks for it.
I mean, if not, one of the other things I was wondering about, you know, you've talked about that you don't necessarily speak to the audience, but you want to start this conversation. What has that conversation been like so far? What are some of the responses you've had at this early stage?
No, I just was blabbing away for 5 minutes.
Yeah, this is on you, Patrick.
Look, the conversation so far has been a good one. I think just based on a superficial read of the room, I'm going to say that most of the audiences were largely sympathetic to the ABC and been largely sympathetic to the message we've given. The problem, of course, is getting that message out. The ABC, this is probably something I'm just ascribing to it rather than saying knowingly. The ABC doesn't really want to talk up and have people going on who are supportive in this way because it sounds like they're kind of patting themselves on the back. They're kind of, you know, they're not being humble about it, honest. Commercial media organisations have no interest whatsoever in having someone come on or plugging and talking about the benefits of public broadcaster. So this is a conversation that needs to be happening more at the ground level, that needs to be happening by communities, that needs to happen with people talking to their MPs, going out and telling their friends about the dangers that the ABC is in. There are a couple of organisations out there that do valuable work for the ABC and kind of represent and offer this public voice for it. Friends of the ABC is a wonderful organisation. And so too are ABC alumni, which is staffed by a couple of people formerly of the ABC. Great organisations, wonderful organisations doing excellent work. One of the issues that Matthew and I encountered when we're doing our research for this book is that any time the commercial media networks decide to run a story critical of the ABC, they don't call friends of the ABC. They don't call ABC alumni. They call Evan McCall to the IPA. So we do have a problem here in the sense that there needs to be greater voices in the room, and those voices need to make themselves felt.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the BBC as well as a comparison point. There aren't that many other robust comparison points. Certainly in the US, as you mentioned in the book, that sort of tradition of public broadcasting is less strong. What is the role, if you had to kind of advocate for it, of the public broadcaster in a country the size of Australia?
Well, I think if I can perhaps go back in time a little bit, a couple of decades ago to when the internet was starting to take off. You know, in my part of the world, in academia, you know, I'm not a cultural studies theorist. I don't wear black skivvies, but a lot of those sorts of people who were writing about and talking about the media at that time thought that the BBC and the ABC were fusty, run by middle-aged white blokes, were going to become dinosaurs, basically, with this wonderful new media that was coming on stream. And if it sounds a little bit quaint from the perspective of 20 years later, it most definitely was the fashion and the trend in both academia and in kind of, you know, places such as bookshops where these sorts of, you know, titles are available. That has not happened. I mean, something else has happened with social media and the misuse of social media and the misuse of online media and the amount of misinformation and indeed disinformation that has been disseminated that's made our general political discourse. I mean, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, but, you know, toxic trolls, you know, vile abuse directed at people, so little space for rational disagreements. You know, people can have in good faith disagreements about issues. I would be the first to happily have a conversation with someone who had a completely different view about the ABC to me, if we could have an in good faith conversation about it and maybe agree to disagree. I'd be really happy to do that, but that's not likely to happen. We have already had a bit of a, how would I describe it? Let's put it this way. Jared Henderson in his weekly media watchdog blog has had a couple of goes at us already in pretty, I mean,
piss poor book.
You've made any enemies.
No, well, he thinks Patrick's fantastic. He thinks I'm like a comrade and I'm very boring. He says the book is boring on 8 occasions, which just leads me to think he's run out of armoury there. But you know, he's had a real go at it, but not what I would call an in good faith go, as in you know, I'm sure there are things you can criticise in this book that we haven't covered, or that we've got wrong, or that we nuance not right, or whatever. Up for that kind of engagement. That's not what we're getting. That's not really going to help anyone. It's going to reinforce in the minds of his readers that, oh, this is another wanky left-wing book by a couple of, you know, whatever. And it's just not really helping debate. So that in that context, public broadcasting is now actually much more important than it used to be, with all of that terrible noise and bad faith and so on around. At least with the BBC and the ABC, you are getting, you know, an attempt to report the news, you know, as even-handedly and as comprehensively as possible, to have kind of standards around the sort of debates on current affairs programs and so on, which you are not seeing in other parts of the media. I mean, I don't know how many of you watch the Sky News so-called After Dark programs, but there's not a lot of, you know, rational debate going on there. I mean, I have watched them on occasion. What's going on there? It's sort of just abuse and snark and vitriol and so on. I really don't know how that helps anyone, to be honest.
Oh, we've got a couple of questions. Should we go over here and then up the back?
Hi, Mark Hayes from ABC alum, retired media and journalism academic, ex-730 Queensland. I really appreciate the way that I would have to say that your book is the second most interesting book about the ABC published this year. Are you aware of Dr. Virginia Small's book on the ABC? It's out on Springer Verlag. You can get a copy of it through your library for free. Otherwise, donate a kidney and a liver to an academic price of it. I do commend that you do take it on.
Sure.
It's a heavy duty. You've got to know Bourdieu's field here at the start. That said, I like the way you take on and use the term ABC loads. It's a delicious term I've used for years. But I have to say, I think you let them off the hook. Sure,
it's not Jared Henderson's view.
You can take them on, but you really don't tunnel into their teleology. What kind of a society and world do they want, given one of their targets is the ABC, because it's a soft hit target? Where does it fit in? If you cut and paste their climate change denial stuff, take out climate change and stick it public broadcasting to the ABC, PBS in the US, CBC Canada, BBC London, BBC UK, Australia, maybe cover NHK. Like climate change denial, pull that out, stick in public broadcasting. It's the same shtick. You've let them off a bit, I would say. But otherwise, congratulations. It's the second best book around.
Thank you. That's a great. I didn't know about that book, and I've got a spare kidney.
Your uni library should be able to get it for free. I nicked a copy for free out of UT libraries.
All sorts of admissions here. And is there another question? Yeah, Peter up the back.
It just seems to be one of the reasons that
Oh, it's just COVID here.
No, you're fine. You're just on the back.
In a pre-digital world, the ABC pretty much got a quarter of what was available to Australian consumers. In the digital world, it's a tiny fraction of the time you account for things like Netflix and all the other digital offerings. How do you make the case for Australians who, a lot of Australians who rarely if ever now consume ABC content? How do you make the case that it's relevant and important to them in the digital world where there's just so much content?
Okay, I'll regard that. The first thing I would say is that abc.net.au, since before the pandemic, is the most accessed online news website, ahead of news.com.au and the Guardian Australia and the SMH and so on. So I think it's actually reaching a lot of people. If you look at their reach via Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and other online and social media platforms, they're large and growing rapidly. That information, for any of you who want to look it up, is in the ABC's annual report, which gets tabled in Parliament every year. And we've got some of those statistics there. So I think that's one thing that I mean, exactly how things percolate out through online is kind of complicated, but you know, I'm sure you would have had an experience where someone says to you, oh, I saw this thing online the other day and it said blah, and once you follow the bunny down the hole, you realise that it's actually from either the ABC or maybe it's from News, maybe it's from Nine or whatever. So I think there's that element. We start the book by asking people to imagine a world without the ABC, and that only goes on for about a page and a bit. But it's extraordinary how much we couldn't fit into a page and a bit of what the ABC has done and what the ABC does. You know, there's the Children's Channel is one good example of something.
Just give a couple from the list. I've done something very mean to you. Even if you just want to.
7:30, Four Corners, Foreign Correspondent, Media Watch, Q&A, Country Hour, Landline, Rear Vision, All in the Mind, Conversations, Bill Adams, Triple J's Hottest 100, Mystery Road, Stateless, Rake, Mad as Hell, Hard Quiz, Bisque, Frayed, Call the Midwife, QI, could do without that to be honest, Killing Eve, Bananas and Pajamas, Play School, Blue, So What, The Royal Lectures.
Idle Control, Total Control. Come on, you missed that one.
See?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a small.
I've been over that list.
Yes, that notwithstanding that, Peter, I think it's a good question to ask in that if you are off in your Netflix world and you're not consuming other forms of news and current affairs, I mean, I do think that's an issue, but it's kind of a broader social issue in the sense that clearly there's lots and lots of great content on Netflix or on Stan or Apple Plus or Disney Plus or Paramount Plus or all of them. What is worrying is that most of those, Netflix does have documentaries, but primarily it's dramas, comedies, chat shows or comedy, satirical programs and so on. Not much in the way of news and current affairs. That's the issue with them, and so I think that goes to a larger question about, and it may go back to school age and how we kind of talk to and work with kids in schools about how they engage with the media and what sort of media habits they form, because it is such a cornucopia of entertainment out there that you could spend the rest of your life watching stuff on Netflix and never know that what's happening in Ukraine is happening right now. If that's, is that a good thing overall for citizens of the world? I would argue not. So it's a way of bringing people to those sorts of events and issues and so on that are happening.
Just in mentioning those figures, you said pre-COVID that it was the highest visited news site.
Sorry, I should have said since pre-COVID, and it's continued since.
Yeah. Has COVID changed Australia's relationship with the ABC through COVID?
I'm not sure, actually.
That's why I asked you to answer it. Because I don't know either.
I think the ABC did quite a bit during COVID. I mentioned the children's program in particular to build links, to talk about and address particular audiences. My understanding is that those efforts have continued since. Matthew talked before, I mentioned the social media outreach the ABC has done. My understanding is that in particular, aspects of the content provided on those platforms have been influenced by concerns the ABC has registered among audiences likely to use those. So namely, younger people working multiple jobs or contending with unemployment or homelessness and so on. And my understanding is the content there has reflected those concerns. And which goes back to the ABC's charter in the sense that it has to be comprehensive and appeal to Australians, but also that it has to appeal to every single Australian and provide that kind of niche appeal content as well. Beyond that, I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure. So.
Perhaps as a final question, I wanted to take you to the dedication of the book. You dedicate the book to the next generation of ABC audiences, specifically Finlay and Claire. I'm doing something a bit mean because particularly online journals are warned against making predictions in a world where they just hop around online to be disproven. But what do you think the future of the ABC looks like for Finlay and Claire, or more broadly?
Finlay and Claire, we should say, are respectively my first grandson and
my daughter,
Patrick's daughter, and they're respectively 2 and a bit and 1 and a smidgen. Right, yes. Anyway, and we deliberately did that to look forward because, I mean, I think that the ABC does so much that it's a matter of having this kind of discussion, encouraging this kind of discussion. And if that flows anywhere, then I think its future should be, if not assured, then much more certain than it is right now. Who knows what the political cycle looks like in the next decade? It's really, I mean, like I said before, with the BBC and with online and so on and how things change, it's that those changes really started happening around about 2010. If you remember, and a decade later, look where we are, and so it is particularly hard in the media environment to look too far ahead, and yet I do think we need to look back as much as we can to help guide us because things are changing so rapidly.
Yeah, I want to make one point about the ABC, that is it being a cultural institution. It's been around for a long time, obviously 90 years, and so it's built up a long tradition of working in all sorts of areas right across the country. One of the things that conservatives pride themselves on is a veneration of institutions, and one of the duties of any government in this country is to pass on to successors institutions in better strength than those they inherited. I would like to think that at some point, and I fervently hope that those on the conservative side of politics will cover their veneration for institutions like the ABC, but also more broadly to ones like the National Library, the National Archives, more memorial shortly. But the ABC in particular, I'd like to see that recovered. My hope is that the fever kind of breaks and they wake up to the value that the ABC provides to this country.
I think that's a beautiful spot to leave it. Yeah. Thank you. And this is really designed to be a conversation, so do stick around, have a chat to the authors, have a chat to each other. That's what the book is all about. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to Carolyn for doing such a great job today. I'm sure that there might be a little coda follow-up with that question about the pandemic, because I certainly know that I watched the presses every day through the ABC on social media, and so did most of my friends. So it'd be really interesting in times of, we know that we did that in the floods in Brisbane when no one had power and we were still using our old radio to try and find out where things were happening. I think there might be a little coda to happen with the pandemic and the public broadcaster. But yeah, so to actually go to the next part of the event, what we're going to do is we're going to get our authors out to the table first before you come and greet them, so that they're not stuck here while we have a bit of a bottleneck. So we're going to get you guys to the table first, and then we will join at the front table. The books are for sale at the front counter. So as they're going, we can give them one more round of applause. Yeah, that's great to see you, Sarah.
Yeah.
You too.
Yeah. I mean, I just haven't really.
Yeah. Out there, so.
I mean, I've got a copy.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think it's okay. It's usually.
So where are you going to pick it up?
Something.
You know, I did that in the airport, so
Yeah, I would have driven, but to be honest, finish riding on the way home, so
yeah.
It's a bit more relaxed. Yeah.
So where
Yeah, so not far from mine, actually. My partner's away. So I don't know if you say the same, she really likes it. It's really funny. Yeah.
So how do you usually drive?
Yeah, and it's really only kind of 3 days campus mostly, which is pretty good.
Yeah, sometimes it's like, I mean, I hate that drive.
Yeah, the drive is stressful.
Really
stressful. Yeah.
So many trucks and as I say, that's so cool.
Yeah, I just get so much done. Yeah.
I mean, mine was fast.
Okay. Yeah, that's yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I sort of keep mind it's quite meditative.
Yeah, I quite like it. Yeah.
Except when, you know, like a few times, you know, when it doesn't, you know.
If you miss one,
No,
yeah, we get stuck. A couple of times.
I used to hate that whole thing of being late to class, you know.
Yes, yeah. And I usually go, my class is unlucky, it started.